Hi everyone, so the Season 5 patch notes are out, and just earlier today the Maxwell team sat down to talk about the tier lists, and this is what I want to show you guys. So as always, we have updated all of our tier lists. We have a bunch of them. There's bossing builds, there's the endgame and pit push, we have the speedfarming builds tier list, leveling builds tier list, and also unique items. So in case you are wondering, like, where do all of these reworked uniques land now that we have those patch notes? I've talked about them in some other videos. I've also talked about some of those uniques here, but this has really shaken up things quite a lot. All unique items in the game have been revamped, and they have been mostly buffed to now be competitive with tempered items and legendaries basically, and this really shakes things up quite a bit, and the outcome is quite interesting. So we talked about this for hours to try to bring you the best prediction for the Season 5 launch. A lot of people are looking forward to that, so let's get into it. Now, I do want to mention that we have a lot of new uniques and a lot of new effects that have been completely untested. Blizzard has just made them after the PTR. We had no way to get our hands on them beforehand. Of course, there will be inaccuracies, and we will be updating the tier list as we go, especially as we learn about whatever happens in the season launch. And there's usually some stuff like that where, you know, bugs creep in, some stuff kind of just works in unintended ways, or something that is just unpredictable. So there are some of those cases here of builds potentially being way stronger or way weaker than we thought, simply based on that. But outside of that, I think we have actually put together a relatively good tier list. And I think the main one to talk about here is the endgame and pit push builds tier list. So this is, you know, to go for the highest tiers possible, to reach maybe even the tier 150 goal of getting the title and these kind of things. Some builds will be able to do that. We have some other tier lists here, the bossing builds tier list, if you want to farm a lot of tormented bosses, for example. So we kind of rank this by time to kill for, let's say, like a 4-man tormented Duriel or something like that. And then we have the speed farming builds tier list. We've actually updated this tier list to also include the pit now. Previously, this was mostly like a Helltide tier list and outdoor content and these kind of things. But now that Helltide is kind of like upgraded to higher difficulties and pit material farming is actually pretty important, we decided to actually include that as well. So this has shifted quite a bit here for the speed farming builds tier list, in case you have seen these in previous seasons. And we have the leveling builds tier list for like the early game, for like 1 to 50 or maybe a bit beyond that. You have a bit of a pointer here for what to go for, and we have some build guides here as well. Keep in mind that I'm recording this video before all of the build guides are actually finished updating. So since we just got the patch notes like 2 nights ago, everyone is still working on their builds. There's a lot of builds that we are covering here. As you can see, we have, I don't know, 50 or 60 builds on the guide, on the site. And this is obviously quite a lot of work for our guys. Everyone is working on multiple guides, and over the course of Sunday, Monday, maybe last minute on Tuesday, we are dedicated to updating everything here. So just keep that in mind. Some stuff might be kind of last minute. Now, that being said, let's jump into the tier list. I guess the main one here is endgame and pit push. So this is if you want to go, you know, and get to the highest tiers, if you want to maybe compete in like a Maxwell ladder again, if you do one again. Right now we have no dedicated plans, but maybe, you know, middle of the season or something, it's a very short season, maybe we're going to do a little bit of a pit ladder again to see where all the builds land. But for now, this is what we got. It is looking really good for rogues and for sorks, as you can see here. And honestly, it's not all doom and gloom for the barbs, as some people had thought after reading the patch notes. Barbs have received some substantial nerfs, in particular to the bleed builds, and it kind of is going to be felt. However, there are also a lot of things that mitigate that loss. And we still have S-tier barb builds here with Flay and with Bash. Those are still going to be performing pretty well. Bash definitely doesn't lose as much from the Gushing Wounds nerf, for example, and it can just play, for example, Walking Arsenal or something like that. So that's going to be a thing, and you can play like a non-bleed Bash basically. And Flay is a bleed build, so it loses quite a bit from the Gushing Wounds stuff, but there are also other ways to mitigate that loss. And thanks to some of the new uniques like Shard of Irathiel, the Crown of Lucion, that very easily fit into some of those builds here on the barb, you can get a lot of this damage and loss back. So this is actually means that barbs are still going to be quite up there, at least with those basic attack builds. And they have received some other buffs too, for example, overpower builds like Death Blow stuff, Upheaval stuff, Hoda stuff. You can do some stuff like that as well. but it's not really on the same level as some of those basic attack builds. Basic attack builds have really received a lot of power here thanks to some of those new uniques. And this is kind of the reason why Bob still stays up there. Now, we also have Rogue with a lot of S tier builds, as you can see here. There's Barrage, there's Rapid Fire, Penshot, and Andariel's Rogue. And in general, Rogues are looking really good. Also thanks to some of the new items, the Umbra Crux, for example. Maybe I can show that off really quick. So the Umbra Crux is a new sword for the Rogue that kind of defines a lot of these builds. It's a dagger that spawns a totem, and you can hit that totem, and then that totem replicates the damage it takes to enemies around it. Now, this is useful for various effects. For example, for Barrage, you can hit the totem and then you can split the arrows in two with the ricochets and then hit the boss with 2 arrows at the same time. So that alone is already pretty valuable, but also the totem itself, at least on the PTR from what we know, had some bugs and actually did more damage than intended. So it seems like this might not be fixed, and this might also kind of like elevate rogues to a pretty cracked level, to be fair. For a bunch of builds, in particular those that can hit extremely fast, because you need to hit it very quickly in order to produce this higher damage effect. And a lot of rogue builds do that, which is why they are so far up. So Barrage, you know, you shoot like 20 arrows, Rapid Fire, you shoot like 20 arrows. Yeah, Penshot doesn't really do that, but it's just kind of like strong enough to also be up here. And then we have Andariel's Rogue that was already a powerhouse in Season 4. It remains really powerful. In fact, Andariel's is getting buffed. A bunch of other stuff is getting buffed. Rogues also have, for example, the new Trick Attacks passive that is really powerful. We have that here in this cluster that gives you extra crit chance and crit damage. And it also has received an upgrade to the Cowl of the Nameless, which is now actually a very good item for rogues. So when we go down here to the rogues, Cowl of the Nameless also has ranks to trigger attacks, which makes it actually a very powerful item. So this is here, and this allows you to actually get an insane amount of crit chance and crit damage from this trick attacks passive ranks here. So it is a pretty cracked passive. In fact, it double dips for precision builds. So all of these like Barrage, Penshot, Rapid Fire, like all these builds are precision builds. They all have a massive benefit from this key passive. So that's also part of the reason why rogues are looking so good here. Then we have Sorks. So Sorks also have a bunch of S tier builds now. Sorks have received some massive buffs across the board. They are way tankier now. They have, all of the skills deal a lot more damage now. They also have better Paragon nodes. So in general, everything has been lifted up quite a lot for the Sorks. And then a lot of their builds are also based on unique items. So for example, Fireball has 2 unique items. Both of them were heavily buffed. So this kind of just moves it up quite a lot. We have Fireball Sork that remains pretty powerful. We have the Chain Lightning Sork with the new Axial Conduit Pants, and that seems to be also quite a powerhouse now. And we have the Lightning Spear Sork based on the new Splintering aspect. So this is a really cool build, and in fact, this is something that Northfire told me about. There might be some really cracked scenario for this build as well, where Lightning Spear can be reset with the reworked Fractured Winterglass. So this is something to keep an eye on here for the Sorks. Fractured Winterglass has been updated to reduce the cooldowns of your conjuration skills, including Lightning Spear, which you're just trying to spam as much as possible. So you might actually try to combine Frozen Orb and Lightning Spear together so that you have these conjurations shooting out those frozen orbs and then constantly getting those explosions, reducing the cooldown of Lightning Spear so much that you can effectively use it as a core skill. So this is kind of the idea here. And if that happens, and if this actually works with all of the frozen orb explosions, it's kind of like, how does it work? We haven't tested it. But if that is true, then Lightning Spear Sork is going to be pretty cracked. So I'm really looking forward to that build either way. It's going to be very fun. And even without this Fractured Winterglass synergy, it's actually a pretty good build. So Sorks in general looking really good. They also have a bunch of other A tier builds here. There's Frozen Orb, Blizzard has been heavily buffed, especially the Blue Rose. Fractured Winterglass is buffed, so we just saw that. And there's a bunch of other stuff up here that you can also play on the Sork. Ball Lightning, Arc Lash, Meteor, Ice Shards, they're all kind of just like all down here. And still fairly okay builds that will push relatively high. So in general, looking like a Sork season and a Rogue season, I'd say they have like the most really strong builds. But again, it remains to be seen with what happens with some of those unique items, some of those kind of question marks in the patch notes. maybe there's other stuff that will surprise us here. For the Necros, we have Bone Spirit, actually one of the strongest builds in the game. I've actually predicted that already, like from the PTR. This looks like it can do billions of damage in a single hit. So that's kind of like the power level that we're looking at here. Bone Spirit has some really cracked build and some pretty insane damage as well. That is also a relatively squishy build though, so depending on how you build it exactly, but you have to kind of give up a lot of defenses to really fit everything in, and this might not be for everyone. And of course, this is not really like, you know, the typical minion summoner playstyle that you might be looking for. That still exists. Minion Necro is still pretty good. Up here in A tier, we have like top of A tier, for example, so solid. Bloodlance is actually making a comeback, so that seems to be relatively solid. Bone Spear is there as well, so there is some other stuff to play. They actually have like each of the main archetypes kind of covered, besides maybe the shadow builds that are not that great right now on the sword, on the Necro. So you have several kind of low here, Blight kind of low here that got some fixes to the Ebon Piercer, for example. So that went way down. That was actually a really powerful build before. But overall, looking okay for the Necros. Not really great, kind of middle of the pack, I would say. They do have a bunch of different good builds, and in general will probably be fine. And lastly, we have the druids here as well. So we have landslide that we moved just barely into S tier. We'll see exactly how it will perform, but landslide slash storm slide is a really powerful build that got some pretty massive buffs, in particular to some of the unique items that it works with. And in general, Druid has received a lot of buffs across the board. In particular, you don't need to go for the Shepherd's meta anymore with the triple companion on your bar just to buff your core skills anymore. That is exclusively a companion thing now. So you actually have more skills on your bar that you can use for like defenses. You can do Earthen Bulwark and Bloodhowl and Debilitating Roar, whatever you want really. There's a lot of really good utility skills. Also, there's the Cataclysm tech that you can do with the new unique ring that is called the Mjolnir ring. So it looks like this. It's a new item that synergizes with Cataclysm, gives you unlimited spirit and 100% increased damage while Cataclysm is active. So as long as you reduce that cooldown to low enough and then have extra duration from, for example, Endless Tempest here, this is actually a pretty huge damage bonus for a bunch of Druid builds. So some of them will run it. In fact, you can even do a dedicated Cataclysm build that works pretty similar to like the Hurricane build that you might have seen from back from the Season 4 times. We have that also in the works right now, a Cataclysm build, kind of similar to the Hurricane build. And if you want to just kind of like walk through a pit and then everything around you gets set by lightning as you run, then this is the build for you. So that's like a new thing that we're making here. In general though, looking pretty good for the druids. We have landslide being really powerful, not as powerful as like some of these omega crazy builds, but again, partly also this is thanks to a bug with the Umbra Crux, for example, for the rogues here that may or may not be fixed. So we'll see exactly. But druid has a really solid and balanced meta. There's a lot of A tier builds here, and Boulder is making a bit of a comeback, for example. There's a lot of B tier builds here, so this is all still pretty solid. There's actually no C or D or anything that we have here on the druid, outside of like maybe some kind of like meme stuff like Flesh Render or so. Shred is not looking very good. Stormclaw is not looking very good. In fact, we are probably archiving both of these builds for the season for the druids because they are just kind of down bad, but outside of that, at least, it's looking very good here. Now, all that being said, in this tier list, we actually assume that pretty much all of these builds here, even down to like C or D, can actually get to like pit 100 plus at least and kind of farm it. Maybe it's gonna be a bit of a struggle here on like some of these builds like C and D, but let's say anything like B tier and up will not really have trouble getting at least very close to pit 100 to farm the masterworking mods at the highest efficiency and just kind of like get everything done basically, you know, farm the tormented bosses and you know, do pit 100 plus easily. Just do anything in the game really that the game throws at you, including probably even Infernal Hordes. We don't have a dedicated Infernal Hordes tier list, but if you go by the pit tier list, then you will get kind of like the same result anyway, because Infernal Hordes scales relatively high to like roughly that pit 100 level, maybe a bit higher. I'm not sure exactly what is the difficulty scaling there, so we'll have to wait and see. Maybe we're gonna make a dedicated tier list for that feature as well. But for now, I would say if you go with any of those, you know, down to B tier or so, then you're not really gonna struggle with anything when it comes to trying to be efficient, trying to do tormented bosses and so on. So you're probably going to be fine. And there's a lot of different choices for all of the classes, which is really cool. So the balance is definitely way better than it was in Season 4, I would say. It looks like overall, everything is way closer together. Every class has an S tier build, at least according to our metric here right now. And we'll have to wait and see, how big are the gaps exactly between the builds after all. We also have a bunch of new builds coming. I already mentioned some of them. Lightning Spear Sork is going to be a new build guide. We also have a Death Blow guide in the works right now with the Further Blade, for example, for the barbs. That looks pretty solid. I made an Arrow Storms rogue as well. I already recorded a video about this, so this is going to go live very soon. This is going to be a very good starter build for rogues, for example. Cataclysm Druid is coming. We're making a minion Bloodthirst version in addition to a regular Bloodthirst Necro, and also Shadow Surfer Necro is coming, although it's not really such a strong build. It's a very fun build. A lot of people are asking for that, so we are making that as well. And this is the Endgame and Pit tier list. We have a lot more tier lists as well, but I'm gonna kind of speedrun them a little bit, since I guess most people are mostly focusing on this one here. But if we're talking about speed farming, so this is what I mentioned earlier. Pit 101, trying to get your masterworking mods really fast, doing like hell tides really fast and these kind of things. This is mostly a Sork and Rogue domain, mostly thanks to their super high mobility. As you can see here, like Sorks, they just go teleport, enchant, maybe a Shaco for the cooldown or something, and you're gonna be flying. You can also do some tech with, for example, Flicker Step that now has 2.5 seconds evade cooldown reduction, which works for teleport enchant. So that is also like an option you can put into many of those Sork builds here, just for that extra evade cooldown to get more teleports, for example. So they're gonna be flying. We have also some stuff here like Andire Rogue, Barrage Rogue, all of these like really good builds that we just saw. They are generally really fast. You usually have dash and shadow step. You kind of just like fly around, go at capped movement speed, and you basically one-shot entire screens in some cases with something like Barrage. So just really powerful farming builds here that can clear pits in probably as little as 2 or even faster minutes. So pretty crazy stuff we can do on some of these classes. Barbs can also do that with Flay / Rupture, kind of just like leaping around, rupturing stuff, flaying the boss, these kind of things. So this looks like a really good build here. The Whirlwind, Tyriel's Might, Gushing Wound, Bleed stuff is probably not really gonna cut it anymore with the Gushing Wounds nerf. But we have some other options here on the barbs. Druids, we have Landslide, Cataclysm up here. So it's just kind of like walking simulator. Everything just dies around you. That should be good enough for that purpose. And Landslide just being like crazy and has insane AoE clear as well. So Druid has some stuff here. We didn't put anything for Necros there just because they just don't really move fast enough. And most of the builds also have a little bit of like a setup time, or, you have to do multiple attacks or something like that. If you're talking about, for example, Bone Spirit, you have to do the Bone Prison, get the resources, and do the explosion, and this is just kind of like too slow to really get on the same level as some of these builds here, where just like go in and blast. But that doesn't mean that Necro is really like terrible at farming Pit 101, for example, or farming Helltide or something like that. They're still pretty solid. They can still go at movement speed cap and you're gonna be okay. There's a bunch of new mobility aspects that Necro has gotten, which seem like they're not really going to make the cut for some of the meta setups, but we can experiment with them and see if you like them. And of course, there's a lot of other useful builds that it can do for like easy content and pit farming and these kind of things. A lot more stuff works when you don't try to go like, let's say, pit 120 or 130 plus or so, which is pretty high end, pretty tough to actually beat those tiers on some of the builds. If you go lower to around 100, a lot more options become very good. As you can see, there's a lot of stuff in S and A that you can choose from. Then we also have the bossing tier list. So this looks like this. So this is mostly for tormented boss farming. If you want to take them down really fast, get your mythic uniques, a lot of people will be farming that. They made it way easier to farm the tormented bosses, since you can now resummon them without leaving the instance, and they only need 1 Stygian stone. So that's a pretty crazy buff, and you can just do insane amounts of boss rotations. So of course, killing them fast is paramount, and you have a bunch of really good builds for that. First up, we have the Bone Spirit Necro that might be powerful enough with a good setup to just straight up one-shot 4-man tormented bosses. So this is how much damage they do. We have the Flay buffs making a comeback with insane single target damage. We have a bunch of this rogue stuff here, similar to what we saw in the pit, and also Bash buff looks like it's gonna be quite up here. And then there's other stuff. a bunch of Sorg builds that will also be okay for this purpose, but they won't just like walk up to a boss and just destroy it basically. So they might have to do a little bit of a fight here, because these tournament bosses actually do have a few billion life. It's not completely trivial to go in and do this, but if you have, let's say, you know, 3 or 4 people playing something like an A or B tier build here or something, then those bosses will fall in probably seconds anyway, or, you know, maybe half a minute or something like that in most cases, and you're gonna be okay. It's not like, you know, this is gonna be like a terribly long fight. Of course, there's gonna be more people there that also contribute some damage, and, you know, maybe you have to do a stagger and then take them down, you know, for some of those rogue builds, for example, and you have usually like a very strong focus on stagger damage. So this might be how that works for some builds, but in general, it's not going to be such a problem for any class to take down those tormented bosses. And there's also a lot of options, kind of similar to what we saw in the pit tier list. Lastly, we have the leveling tier list. So if your objective is just to get to, you know, the end game very fast and maybe try out Infernal Hordes, do your season journey, battle pass stuff, maybe get to level 100 and then kind of like chill out, then you can probably go with some of those builds here. So Rogue and Necro are really good, and also Sorgs. So there's also going to be some new tech with, like, for example, Hydra. Hydra has been buffed quite a bit. That is going to sneak its way into some of those Sorg builds. Most of the Rogue stuff probably mostly unchanged. There's some buffs to Flurry. Flurry is also going to be something you're going to get from the Season Journey stuff. We have them marked with an asterisk here that gets like some Season Journey powers and items that will help you out here. Chain Lightning, for example, also gets that. So you're going to have a pretty smooth start here on those classes. And then, yeah, Barbs and Druids, they are usually a little bit weaker in terms of the leveling, at least in the early game. But depending on how lucky you get, depending on what kind of, like, you know, aspects you get and so on, and when you get them, you can also really speed up the leveling and then get to 100 pretty fast. So this is just something I want to show you really quick, the leveling builds tier list. And of course, we have those leveling guides here as well for the smooth early progression, so they can go check it out. I gotta say, if our predictions are accurate, I'm actually fairly happy with how this looks right now. Not just because I'm a rogue enjoyer, I will actually personally not start a rogue. I will probably start a Sorg or maybe a Druid this time around, even though rogue is looking so strong. But I also really want to play something like Lightning Spear. I'm very much looking forward to that build. Landslide was really fun on the PTR when I tried it. I also have a guide for this and also this here, so stay tuned for that. And there's also just like a bunch of other builds on all the classes that I want to try. I have some plans for the season, and we'll see how it will play out, how much time I will have to do everything. But I'm really looking forward to some of those builds here on the buffed classes. It's going to be very fun. And in general, as I mentioned, it looks like it's going to be way better balanced without just, like, you know, mostly rogues and bars being like far at the top, and then the other classes kind of like dragging behind a little bit. It looks like all of the classes have really powerful builds for all purposes, even if like the in-class balance is not really perfect in some cases. So for example, you have like a kind of big spread on a Necro between Bone Spirit here, and then, you know, like those B and C tier builds down here, but they are still playable. And Bone Spirit actually needs something like a lot of investment to really come online and really do those billions of damage. So it will actually take a while for some of those builds to really get to the point where they are this powerful. The same applies, you know, to something like the Flay Barb and the Bash Barb. You need a lot of the uniques that come from the Infernal Hordes, like the Shard of Raphael and the Crown of Lucion, to really get to the point, or maybe they are kind of elevated more than other builds by some of the Uber uniques, or the mythic uniques as they're called now. In those cases here, for example, Starless Skies is very powerful. Tyrus Might goes into many builds. Tyrus Might is like the strongest item in the game now in terms of popularity, at least. It's gonna go into almost anything because it gives you so much defense, and that also helps, like, of course, a melee build more than a range build on the barbs. So there might be a bit of like a longer progression curve before you really feel overpowered for some of those builds, where, for example, Barrage Rogue just kind of works. You know, you play it from level 1 and you're blasting, and then you just get stronger and stronger and stronger as you get all of those endgame uniques. So you always have to keep that in mind, that some classes kind of, and some builds, scale a little bit differently. So this is something we can't really represent here on the tier list, but something to keep in mind at least. So to give you a bit of an idea and a visualization of what I just explained, I actually have this paint masterpiece that I've made here during season 4. This is like a season 4, you know, discussion I made at some point. So just to give you an idea, you start out here at level 10, level 25, 50, and 100, and then like endgame gear, fully masterwork, and so on. And you have like different progression curves, basically, depending on the class, depending on the build. So in some cases, it's like much more smoothed out, like for the rogues. With barbs, you usually have like a really long tail end when they go really high. As you can see here, this might actually be a bit lower now since they nerfed some of the barb stuff. So it might be like, somewhere around here now, but still really good for the barbs. And then kind of similar for necros, you just kind of get your minions and then you're blasting. And then there might be other builds like what I mentioned with Bone Spirit, where you have like a bit of like a longer curve and so on. So just to kind of like for you guys to understand how this works for some of the classes. Now, lastly, I'm not really going to go into all of the details here on the unique tier list, but I also want to mention this. We actually just spent a long time discussing every single unique item with all of the changes, and we made this unique tier list. And it actually looks kind of interesting. There's a lot of uniques now, so this took a while, and we kind of try to rank them by usability, let's say. Basically, we have a metric here where, if like a build is like present in many builds, and especially good builds, then it's like somewhere in S or A, or if it's like, some situational thing, or like, the best item for a relatively good build, or like a build defining item, let's say, for example, Axial Conduit, right? The new pants for Chain Lightning, or Blue Rose, it's like a kind of build and item for Blizzard Sword. These kind of things. So they go here. So they will see use depending on what build you're playing. And then you have D and F, where it's kind of like, mostly trash tier items, or, you build enabling items for kind of trashy builds. So one of those examples would be Word of Hakan. We have that here. It's a very powerful item, but for one of the weakest builds you can play on the rogue. So it's down here basically. So this is kind of like how we rank this. And well, just there are some really powerful items now. I just want to go through like maybe S and A a little bit, just to give you a bit of an idea. So Tierlist Might has been Omega buffed, gives you like insane. This is actually the old tooltips right now, so don't get confused. This gives you insane amounts of defense now, so a lot of builds will just use Tierlist Might because it has been updated to be like absolutely crazy. I can show that actually real quick. So we have Tyrells down here. Basically, a lot of these mythic uniques are really powerful now. So here you see this maximum all res and 60 all res, like it just solves resistances by itself. You get to the resistance cap of 85% relatively easily. And then you have damage reduction here. You get movement speed on top of it. Crazy item. So I guess you kind of understand why people want to use this. Shaco also has been buffed, for example. Grandfather has been buffed. So all of these here, Stardust Guys as well. These are like some of the craziest uniques now, the mythic uniques here. So Grandfather looks like this. A bunch of bar builds will definitely run this. Potentially could even consider this on some necro builds. Then we have a Stardust Guys that got a juicy chunk of crit and attack speed now, and core skill ranks in addition to what it already did. So this is also going to go into a lot of builds, and also kind of fuels this entire like basic attack Shard of Irathiel, Crown of Lucion engine that a bunch of builds will use. Or even without Shard of Irathiel, just Crown of Lucion plus Stardust is a really powerful combo for some builds that just gives you insane amounts of damage, and you negate most of the downside you have from a Crown of Lucion. So you just get mostly a damage upside. So this is why Stardust Guys is so powerful. Andari's Visage makes a comeback as well, when stronger than ever. That will actually kind of sneak its way into non-Andario builds as a utility choice, defensive choice or something, even if you don't really care about this poison proc that much. But for example, some sword builds might run this because you get an extra Tarasha ring proc, and you get this insane amounts of attack speed now. You get the poison res, which is kind of cool. You get life per hit, which is not good for swords, but for anything that's not barrier based or potentially even temerity based, you can actually get insane amounts of healing here. This is probably better than the lifesteal was before, and just generally a pretty powerful item here. And of course the Harlequin Crest as well. So this is like some of the craziest items that we have here, but a bunch of those uniques have been lifted up. So this is what we got here. So there's a bunch of builds that, would consider, Sunfire Condemnation. There's a bunch of builds on Druids that run Wild Heart Hunger. So there's some of those class-specific items you really want to keep an eye out for, try to get a good roll, try to trade for them, or try to hold on to them, to sell them at least to people. So this is why you make this unique items tier list, so that you have a bit of an understanding of which items are really worth looking at. You might fill up your stash with a lot of these uniques, and then you realize, yeah, no one really cares. some of these, but some of them are really valuable when you get good rolls. So keep an eye out for those. And that concludes my tier list video here. So hope you enjoyed this. I try to give you a good overview of all of the classes and kind of what to expect. Again, keep in mind this is pre-season start with a lot of uniques untested. So of course we're going to be updating this once we have more information, usually after like a week or so. Once we have played it a little bit, we're going to be updating our tier list. We have more here like the Night Mansion Glyph XP and the Night Mansion like XP farming. Those are actually unchanged because the dungeons presumably were not changed, and it's the same Night Mansion rotation, so you can use exactly the same list from last time, and this is the same in season 5 here. And yeah, that's pretty much it for this tier list video. So let me know what you think. Let me know if there's something that you think is a massive oversight. Maybe we have something ranked completely opposite of what you thought or so. Kind of an interesting outcome, I gotta say, for myself personally as well. And I'm really excited to see like how close to the truth is it really. But for now, this is what I got here. So hope you enjoyed this. Stay tuned for the build updates, of course, on Maxroll. So everyone is hard at work here to bring you the up-to-date build guides. And I hope everyone is gonna have a great season. Hope you liked this video and see you guys next time.